Today, we're diving into what you might call an accidental revolution. It's an incredible story about how a monk's crisis of faith, a massive fundraising scheme, and a brand new technology all collided to literally change the world. And it all kicked off with a piece of paper and a hammer.
So here's the central question, right? How on earth could a list of academic points, stuff meant for a quiet debate between professors, end up sparking a revolution that would tear Christendom in two?
Because that's all it was at first. Seriously, we are not talking about some grand declaration of war. We're talking about a notice board, basically, a document posted on a church door in a sleepy little university town.
And yet, that simple act lit a fuse. The explosion that followed completely reshaped religion, politics, even the map of Europe. So to really get how this happened, we've got to start not with the big boom, but with the guy who accidentally lit the match.
See, our story begins not with a firebrand revolutionary, but with an overworked priest and scholar named Martin Luther. And to understand why he did what he did, you first have to understand just how insanely busy this guy was. I mean, listen to his own words. Just a year before everything went sideways, he wrote to a friend, "I could use 2 secretaries. I rarely have full time, not to mention my own temptations with the world, the flesh, and the devil. You see how lazy I am." This is not a man looking for a fight. This is a guy who is completely swamped.
But buried under all that work was this one powerful idea that had been growing in his mind for years. Luther was absolutely convinced that salvation, being made right with God, wasn't something you could earn. It wasn't something you could buy. It was a totally free gift from God that you just had to accept through faith. That one idea, it is the key to absolutely everything that's about to happen.
And that is why he couldn't just stay quiet. As a local priest, he was watching his own church members, his flock, run off to buy these things called indulgences. They were basically get-out-of-purgatory free cards sold by the church. For Luther, this was a spiritual disaster. He believed it was giving people a false sense of security and actually putting their souls in danger. His motive wasn't political, it was personal. It was pastoral.
So to really understand Luther's rage, you have to follow the money. Because what he was up against, well, it wasn't just some bad theology. It was a massive international fundraising machine where high finance and church business were completely intertwined.
Okay, so it all started with a backroom deal between 3 huge players. First, you've got Albert of Brandenburg. He's this ambitious noble who wants to hold 3 powerful church positions at once, which was a huge no-no under church law. Second, there's Pope Leo X, who was desperate for cash to build the magnificent St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And third, you have the Fuggers, who were basically the Goldman Sachs of their day, the most powerful bankers in Europe.
And the price tag for the Pope to just look the other way and give Albert his offices? It was staggering. The Pope first asked for 12,000 gold coins, one for each of the 12 apostles. Albert cheekily offered 7,000 for the 7 deadly sins. They finally landed on 10,000 ducats, a fortune that Albert immediately had to borrow from the Fugger Bank.
So they cooked up this plan. The public story, the justification for everything, was that this special indulgence was to raise money for the glorious St. Peter's, a noble cause, right? But the private deal was this. For the next 8 years, every coin collected from selling these indulgences would be split 50-50. Half would go to the Pope in Rome, the other half, it went straight to the Fugger Bank to pay off Albert's massive loan. The common folks, of course, had no idea.
Okay, so you've got the deal, you've got the product. What do you need? You need a salesman. A really, really good one. And boy, did they find their man.
His name was Johann Tetzel. He was a Dominican friar who was an absolute master of religious theater. He'd roll into a town with a whole parade, carrying the Pope's seal on a velvet pillow. His one and only job was to convince regular people to open their wallets.
And he was shockingly good at it, thanks in large part to this little jingle. The promise was so simple, so powerful. The very instant your coin clinks in the collection box, your dead mother's soul flies straight out of purgatory and into heaven. I mean, what a sales pitch. It was aimed right at people's hearts, playing on their grief and their love.
Just look at what was on offer here. It wasn't just forgiveness. It was a plenary and perfect remission of all sins. A factory reset back to the moment of your baptism. And, get this, if you were buying one for a dead relative, you didn't even have to feel sorry for your own sins. It was the perfect spiritual loophole. For Luther, this was a horror show.
So this was the final straw.
When people from his own church started coming back from a nearby town, waving these indulgence papers in his face, Luther knew he had to do something. So on October 31st, 1517, that's the eve of All Saints' Day, a huge religious festival, Luther walked over to the Castle Church in Wittenberg. And, just as you'd post a notice on a community bulletin board, he tacked up a list of points he wanted to debate with other scholars. That list became the legendary 95 Theses.
But what was actually in these 95 points? What was he so upset about? Well, you can boil all of his arguments down to 3 main lines of attack.
First, he went right for the wallet. He asked this really sharp question. If the Pope is richer than the wealthiest man alive, why is he building St. Peter's with the money of poor people? Second, he attacked the Pope's authority itself, saying, hey, the Pope has no power over purgatory. He can't spring souls from there. And third, and this was the most important point for him, was the spiritual danger. He argued that things like giving money to a neighbor in need were way better than buying an indulgence, and that these pardons were just making people lazy and complacent about their faith.
And this, right here, is where the story goes completely off script. Luther thought he was starting a quiet conversation among academics. Instead, he started a wildfire.
You've got to remember, Luther didn't set out to be a revolutionary. He wrote the Theses in Latin, the language of scholars. He wasn't talking to the public, he was trying to start a debate with other professors.
But then, the game changer happened. Somebody, we still don't know who, got a copy of his Latin theses, translated them into German, the language of the people, and took them to a printer. Thanks to this amazing new technology, the printing press, copies just exploded across Germany in a matter of weeks. What was meant to be a private academic squabble suddenly became the #1 topic of conversation in the entire country.
There's this beautiful metaphor that just captures this moment perfectly. It says, Luther was like a man climbing a dark, winding staircase inside a cathedral. He reaches out his hand to steady himself, and he accidentally grabs a rope. All of a sudden, to his own complete shock, he hears the deafening clang of a giant bell ringing out, waking up the whole world. And that really leaves us with this final, powerful thought. Luther's story is this incredible testament to the power of an idea when it hits the right moment and the right technology. And it makes you wonder, what happens when one person's quiet search for truth accidentally rings a bell so loud that the entire world wakes up to listen?